Welcome to Avatar State of Mind, a podcast exclusively dedicated to the universe of Avatar The Last Airbender. From The Last Airbender to The Legend of Korra, the comic books, the Kyoshi novels, this is your number one stop for Avatar content. My name is Sam DeCoste, and I'm joined by Aaron Miller to spend the next 30 minutes with you talking about the Avatar universe. From the Northern Water Tribe to Ba Sing Se and Zuko's honor, of course, we've got you covered. This is Avatar State of Mind. Welcome back to Avatar State of Mind. This is Sam DeCoste with Aaron Miller. Aaron, it's been 2 weeks since our last show. Obviously, the presidential election was more important than this show and this podcast, but we're back ready to go.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. Unfortunately, this is probably the last in-person podcast we're going to record. I'm going to be going home relatively soon. I don't know when, but we're going to be doing some Zoom podcasts.
It'll be a lot easier to edit on Zoom, but it will be the last in-person show of 2020. It's been a pretty horrible year, but this is one of the few good things that has come out of it, so just want to recognize that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So let's push on with our series-long recap of Avatar The Last Airbender. We're going to spend another episode talking about individual chapters. We'll break down every chapter of Avatar in order from books 1 to 3, from The Boy in the Iceberg to Sozin's Comet. Previously on the podcast, we talked about The Great Divide and The Storm. Next up, we're talking about episodes 13 and 14, The Blue Spirit and The Fortune Teller. Before you listen any longer, let this be your spoiler warning. Do not listen to the show today unless you have watched the first 14 episodes of Avatar The Last Airbender. Ideally, though, you should watch the whole show before listening to this, but if you haven't, you might be in too far deep at this point, so whatever. Let's move on. So let's talk about The Blue Spirit, which, Aaron, I believe you remember, was one of my top 5 favorite episodes back in episode 1 of this podcast, and it still is.
Yeah, I mean, after watching this episode again, and I'd just like to point out that you and I watched these 2 episodes right before recording. This was the first time that we actually watched episodes together, and I absolutely see why this is in your top 5. This episode, for me, isn't in my top 5, but it's in my top 7 for sure.
Well, let's start with the Yuyan archers. It's the archers of the Fire Nation that have legendary precision that can pin a fly to a tree from 100 yards away without killing it, which is really accurate. And then Commander Zhao becomes appointed admiral, and now he is able to order his inferiors to allow him to snatch the Yuyan archers and use them to hunt for the Avatar. And that is the driving force for Zhao. And really, Zhao drives this episode because he's spearheading the hunt for the Avatar. His promotion to Admiral is giving him top priority in his hunt. So every Fire Nation soldier has to report to him now.
Yeah, and I think Zhao's promotion to Admiral fits his character so well, because Zhao, at the base of his character, is just like this commanding figure, this person who has to always have the last word. And now that he's admiral, he literally has the last word on every decision.
Pivoting over to Team Avatar, Sokka, somewhere in an Earth Kingdom hiding, is sick. The storm from episode 12 gave him a fever, hallucinations, congestion. He's sick. And then we see Katara coughing, and she's getting the same sickness as Sokka. And so Aang has to go find something to give them a cure. He has to find some sort of remedy that can help them feel better. So he goes and hunts for a cure, while Zuko and crew are sailing, looking to regain the Avatar's trail after the storm. And then their ship becomes invaded by Zhao's men, declaring Admiral Zhao has been promoted, and now all intelligence gained about the hunt of the Avatar must be directly reported to Zhao from now on. And that forces Zuko into a spiral, because he's starting to lose hope that he will ever, not just find the Avatar, but just ever be happy again. Because we learned in the last episode what Zuko's backstory is and the significance of finding the Avatar, and it looks like he's hopeless.
And the line Zuko said during all of this to end like this little scene of him not having any more hope was, "My honor, my throne, my country. I'm about to lose them all." And Zuko saying that was just so saddening, because in reality, he didn't have any of this to begin with, but any sliver of hope that he did have this was sort of gone by the way that Zhao was really, really taking charge of this Avatar hunt.
In the span of 2 episodes, Zuko goes from the ultimate villain to a really complex character that you actually feel bad for. And that really creates a very compelling storyline for Zuko. But we go back to Aang. He finds an old woman's medicine hut, and he finds a cure for Katara and Sokka. Then he's ambushed by the Yu Yan archers. And then the Yu Yan archers actually capture Aang in some windstorm, which actually is even more impressive. I didn't notice this until I watched it again just before this podcast. But the archers captured Aang during a windstorm. They are so precise that they can capture the greatest airbender of his generation in the wind as well. I never noticed that until I watched it again.
Yeah, I mean, from my personal experience, like I've shot a bow before, and even 5 miles an hour, anything minimal of like wind just sends an arrow in the wrong direction. And this is probably like 40-mile-an-hour winds. So these people are, I mean, obviously the show is fiction, but like for somebody in real life to be this talented, they would have to dedicate their entire life to. And obviously these people did.
Aang is captured, and Aang is sent to a Fire Nation stronghold somewhere, probably a military base in the Fire Nation. And he at last meets Admiral Zhao. And this is the first time they ever actually interact. This is the first conversation they ever have. And Zhao is very proud to boast his accomplishment of being the one to capture the Avatar after generations of Fire Lords and Fire Nation commanders failed to do. But then he tells Aang how killing him would be pointless, because then a new Avatar will be born, and then they have to restart their search all over again. So Zhao will keep Aang alive, just barely.
And did you remember the way that Zhao was just on like his little pedestal up elevated and talking to the people down below? It reminded me of Adolf Hitler talking to Nazi soldiers. I mean, I've watched and listened to a lot of interviews, and the foundation the Zhao's character is low-key and somewhat based on Adolf Hitler, just the way that he's so aggressive. And like even Zhao said that firebending is the superior element, when in reality it's really not. It's probably one of the weakest ones, and that's the same philosophy Hitler had for his race. So the connection between those two people is really, really establishes Zhao. I mean, personally, I think Zhao is a stronger villain than the Fire Lord, just because of this comparison.
Well, they certainly make him out to be that dictator-esque villain that he is. He is a very strong villain in this series. But Aang is captured, and Zhao is very articulate about this, saying, there's nobody here to rescue you. You're not escaping this fortress, and no one's going to rescue you. But then we see this mysterious masked man wearing a creepy smiling blue mask with a pair of swords who begins breaking into the prison. Who's this, you might think? Well, if you've watched the episode, you know who it is, but we'll say a little bit later. But he finds his way in and ambushes the prisoner guards. He sets Aang free without any bending, just stealth and combat. And then Aang and him team up to escape this Fire Nation military stronghold, taking on the entire fleet of soldiers. And they do it. And then we obviously learn who it is. Do you want to tell the audience who the Blue Spirit is, Aaron?
Yeah, this guy is Zuko himself. And you know what? When I watched this episode for the first time years ago, I was convinced that this was just a random person. Because do you remember when the firebenders had the Blue Spirit, Zuko, and Aang up against the wall, and there were 3 fire blasts coming in, and Zuko was in front of Aang, and Zuko could have stopped the fire right then and there, but he didn't. He let Aang come out in front of him and use airbending to shoot off the fire. So like this right here was an excellent way for the creators to like reinforce and try to trick people into thinking he wasn't Zuko. And it's also kind of scary for Zuko, because what if Aang didn't jump in front of them and do that? They would have both been burned.
I just want to talk a little bit more about how Aang and Zuko took down this entire fleet together. Aang's airbending and Zuko's combat and swordsmanship. It's not talked enough about how Zuko is a stealthy warrior. He is one of the best warriors in the show in terms of one-on-one combat and swordsmanship. It's not even a question. And you see it here. You see how Aang and Zuko team up to take out this entire fleet. And then we see Zuko ultimately shot by one of the Yu Yan archers. And then Zhao says, knock out the thief. And then we'll have him delivered to the Fire Lord along with Aang, who they thought they were going to find Aang and retreat and get the Avatar, but they didn't. But we were talking about this when we were watching the episode. It's very likely that if Aang decided to leave Zuko behind, that Zuko would have been killed. Who knows what would have happened to Zuko when his father would have seen him back in his palace. The disgust, the humiliation, embarrassment, treason that Zuko committed.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine even right then and there if Zhao just didn't even send him back to his father? Zhao just did it himself. He killed Zuko. I mean, Iroh didn't know where Zuko was. Iroh was asleep this entire time. He didn't even know Zuko was gone. So if Zuko would have been, this is all what if, all this stuff, and I know you're not a fan of that, but like, what if Zhao killed Zuko right there? Iroh would have no idea where he went. He'd be so confused. And obviously they would send the entire series into a spiral because Zuko is such an important character later on. But going back to Zuko's skill with his swords, who do you think would win 1v1 with swords, Zuko or Sokka?
I don't think it's a question. It's got to be Zuko.
Really?
I don't think Sokka could take Zuko on one-on-one. I don't think at all. I think Sokka is not, even as he develops, he is not the warrior that Zuko is ever.
I think that's a hot take because you said ever, like even like in book 1, if they were to fight, you think Zuko would win? Well,
I think in book 1, Sokka is obviously an underdog, but even in book 3, Zuko is still much better than Sokka as a warrior. 100%.
I would say the opposite. Obviously book 1, even book 2, I think Zuko would win. But book 3, just like the amount of training, the amount of maturity Sokka got, I think Sokka's the better warrior.
I don't agree. I think Zuko, and obviously I'm obviously taking out Zuko's firebending. I'm not considering that in this discussion. I think Zuko's combat that we see in this episode, in later episodes, it's pretty clear. And Sokka gets better, but he's never really that good. He's not really known for his combat. He's known for his intelligence.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm thinking is this has to be a future episode. I want to look into this further. I want to get to the foundation of this, and maybe we can get some guests to determine who's right.
Well, I think I told you this once before, but there's one video game that the world needs, and it's a Super Smash Bros. Edition of Avatar. Just Avatar characters. I don't know why we haven't had it yet, but we need it. We need it really badly.
Well, did you see that Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo Switch just got Minecraft characters? So maybe Nickelodeon and Nintendo should get together, figure something out.
We should. Definitely. But going back to Earth a little bit, in the Blue Spirit, Aang does decide to save Zuko. And he takes him away to some forest. And then Zuko wakes up, and Aang is just opening up. And he's talking about his life before the war, and how one of his best friends in the whole world was this guy named Kuzan, who was also from the Fire Nation, just like Zuko. And Aang wondered that if they knew each other before the war started, that if they could be friends. And Aang said, do you think we could be friends if we knew each other back then? And then once Aang closes his mouth, Zuko tries to strike him. And then Aang just runs away. It's a very deflating end to an action-packed episode. And you see these two kids team up and really show that they are a great team, and they just fit so well, and they really match together. Their airbending and combat go hand in hand, and it really opens the door to considering Zuko a potential ally down the road.
I would take that even further. I would say that it not only made fans consider Zuko as an ally down the road, I think it made Zuko himself consider it. Do you remember at the very end of the episode, after Aang was talking to Katara and Sokka, and after Katara and Sokka got better by sucking on the frogs, it showed Aang laying down on Appa and Zuko laying down in his bed on the ship, and it transitions. It basically shows like they're very similar in the way they're laying and all this stuff. The most significant part of what I'm trying to get at is when Zuko's laying in his bed, he's looking forward and he looks to his right at the Fire Nation flag. And I think that look right there was a look of doubt. It was a look of doubting why he's still loyal to the Fire Nation, why he's still following all of this, even though he's been disgraced by it.
He does turn his back when he's trying to sleep. He turns his back to the flag, if that's what you're...
Yeah, he looks at it and then he turns his back. Yep.
The attention to detail in these episodes is unbelievable. And then Sokka and Katara do get cured. They suck on the frogs, their skin excretes a substance that cures fevers, apparently, and their fevers go away. How about medicine in this universe? It's very fascinating, don't you think?
Yeah, just suck on some frogs, you'll be all right.
And it worked. It actually worked like a charm. Yeah. Better than any medicine you can ever take. Just suck on a frog. How about that? What a world, huh? Well, that puts a wrap on The Blue Spirit. It's sincerely one of my favorite episodes all time. I love it. I could watch it 100 times. It's amazing. But let's move on to a little more forgettable episode. It's The Fortune Teller. It's chapter 14. This is all about love. It's all about filling time as well, isn't it? This is definitely a filler episode.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this episode and The Great Divide are in the same category. Even though I like The Great Divide, I think I like this one a little bit more just because of the illusion it gives to future relationships and future episodes, but don't want to get ahead of myself.
Well, let's talk about the relationship that I'm sure you're alluding to. Aang and Katara. Aang makes a necklace for Katara out of fishing bait, much to Sokka's dismay. And then we see Katara, at least initially, doesn't really look at Aang. I mean, when they met, Katara looked at Aang as the world's last resource of hope. But now Katara looks at Aang like a little brother, a sweet little guy, just like Momo, according to what her words.
When you and I were watching the episode just a little while ago, I looked over at you for a second and we were both just like smiling. Like that was such a crazy line. It's like, come on.
But the episode is named after Aunt Wu, who is the village fortune teller. So Aunt Wu invites Team Avatar to go receive readings for their future based on bones, which is another interesting way of reading fortunes. But we see Katara goes first. She's told she's going to marry a very powerful bender, but Aang eavesdrops, and he's very happy about that. He gets this big smile, big ear to big ear, and he's thinking, "Oh, I'm going to marry Katara. What more powerful bender is there in the world than the Avatar, who knows every element? Of course he's going to marry Katara. Of course it's going to happen." And then Aang tries to go talk to Aunt Wu to get his validation from her himself. And then Aunt Wu was like, "Oh my gosh, you're going to be involved in a great battle that will decide the fate of the world." And Aang says, "Oh yeah, I know that already. But like, what about my love life? What do you think of that?"
And then she lied and said, "Just follow your heart." I mean, she didn't really lie.
It's not a lie. It's not even a truth.
She definitely, yeah, sure. She just pulled it out of her butt.
It's also relevant that Mang, Aunt Wu's assistant, definitely likes Aang and his big ears. She loves him and his big ears.
You know what I like about Mang though? Mang, what's her name? Mang. I like that she's voiced by the same person that Toph is, and you pointed that out to me.
Yeah, I was going to say thanks for stealing my thunder, but you did plug me there. But yes, if you did not know that, the assistant to Aunt Wu, Mang, the girl that has a crazy crush on Aang in this episode, is actually the same voice actress as Toph Beifong. Who's Toph Beifong? Well, you'll meet her a little later, if you haven't met her already. If you haven't watched any of this show yet, that is. Let's talk a little more about the village and their dependency on the fortune teller, because that is the main point of this episode. The fortune teller does an annual cloud reading to determine if the volcano, which looms in the distance of this village, will remain dormant or erupt and inevitably consume the village and kill everybody. The village used to check themselves, but when Aunt Wu came around, they stopped because they just listened to her and everything she says. If Aunt Wu farted, the whole village would say that was their perfume. Yeah, that's how they operate. That's how they're wired.
I like that comparison.
You like that comparison?
I like that.
That's how it is. What she said was their Bible. They believed every word that she said.
Yeah, I mean, even at the end of the episode, when everything happens, they still believed her.
It's miraculous how much they believe her. But her cloud reading determines that the village will not be destroyed by the volcano this year because the cloud looked like a wild goose with a weird head, whatever. Also, what I've been noticing from this episode when I watched it again, the writers are really overachieving, or they're really going out of their way to make Aang's love for Katara relevant, because it's really not. In the whole scope of the series, if you pick out a few episodes in particular, they pick certain times to make their love relevant. But most of the time, most of the series and its arc, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't that important until this one. I mean, obviously, earlier on, Aang felt like a little bit of a connection, but it was kind of just like a crush that this little kid had. But I mean, after this episode, it really kicked it in high gear. I mean, we kind of forgot about it for a little while, but it picked up significantly later on.
We even see Aang tell Katara that he likes her when Aunt Wu does her cloud reading, and she just doesn't hear him. And Aang was so nonchalant about it and so lackluster in it. He was like, Katara, I like you, but more than normal.
Honestly, like, I forgot that he did this. I thought the first time he actually confessed was in book 3, when all that stuff was happening. No spoilers here. But no, like, the first time was way back in book 1.
And she didn't even hear him. It seems very forced. And he's very desperate at this point. And then he's so desperate, in fact, that he actually goes to Sokka for advice about women. And Sokka, this is great. This is amazing. I love this. Sokka says, being too nice is the worst thing that a man can do. The best thing they could do is act aloof. Maintain maximum aloofness and pretend like you do not care at all about anything. I think there's something to that in real life, to be honest with you. I think a degree of aloofness is actually very helpful and produces results. Thoughts?
I disagree heavily.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you explain?
No.
You're not going to even tell me why you disagree.
No, I mean, I don't know. Sokka's opinion is invalid 100% because before this happened, he never talked to any female of his age. He never did. He's just making this up. But I don't think so. I want to know why you think so. And maybe I'll say why not.
Well, naturally, sometimes, because you know this, love is a game. And you have to play your cards a certain way to get what you want. And sometimes, some people, what they think, with some people, they're more attracted to somebody when they act like they don't care about them at all. Psychologically, it doesn't make sense. That's not how I operate. I would not think that. That's not how I'm wired. But some people are. Some people are wired to feel attraction to somebody who couldn't give a badgermole about them at all.
I think that obviously people like that do exist, but I think they're so few and far between that I haven't come across that.
Well, good for you. That's great. I'm glad that you have not encountered this in your life. But let me tell you, it exists. It does exist.
All right, Sam, we're getting deep here for a minute.
It exists. Some people are wired like that. Maybe some listeners are wired like that. If you are, that's fine. It's okay.
If you're wired like that, you are Team Sam. If you're not, you are Team Aaron.
But what? I'm not associating myself as that to be good.
No, I know.
I don't want to attach myself to this because I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it like you don't, because I know you don't believe in it. Okay, we're spiraling. Let's get back to the episode. Maintaining that neighborhood of romance, Aang tries to go find a panda lily to give to Katara, and they can only be found at the volcano, which is also kind of an oxymoron, finding a flower at the volcano. Okay, all those rocks and all that. I'm forgetting what the vocabulary I learned in my 6th grade science class.
Well, you do know that volcanic soil is very fertile. Very fertile.
Interesting.
It is.
But I didn't really see much soil. I just saw a bunch of igneous magma and rocks.
Using big words I don't understand.
Yes, that's the vocabulary I was trying to remember. But the important thing about this is that they discovered that Awu was wrong and the volcano is going to erupt momentarily. And Team Avatar has just a few hours to get these people out of the town as soon as possible. And they try to warn the village, but nobody believes them. They don't listen to reason. They only listen to Aunt Wu. And then Aang manages to trick Aunt Wu and the village by creating a bunny cloud signaling volcanic doom. Aunt Wu buys it, and then the village buys in. It's miraculous. Even after the volcano went boom, when you see this ash in the air, when you see the volcano erupting, when the ground is shaking, they don't buy it. But because Aunt Wu saw a cloud with a bunny, she believed it.
Yeah, and to go back to when Aang and Sokka went to get that flower, you know how the guy who they got the idea from did the same thing? You're telling me he didn't see that this volcano was about to erupt? Like, come on. Or was he just so focused on Aunt Wu that he didn't care? He was like, oh, that's fine. That's how it normally looks. It's okay. I'm not about to die or anything.
Maybe. And maybe he doesn't even know what a volcano looks like when it's going to erupt.
Yeah.
I think that's also the thing.
The talking about how Aang and I guess the rest of the village and Sokka and Katara battled this volcano. This mimics the way that Roku battled the volcano in a few episodes before this. And I mean, obviously Roku's volcano was like probably 10 to 15 times worse than this one. And Roku is only one person fighting, even though Sozin was there, blah, blah, blah. But this shows that even though Aang is 12 years old, he can fight a volcano, and this 70-something-year-old master avatar Roku can't. So it shows how powerful Aang is early on.
And Sokka really realizes that. Sokka says how sometimes he forgets how powerful of a bender Aang actually is. And then Katara hears that when someone articulates it like that. Katara is like, oh, well. Then Katara starts thinking of him a little differently, because she knows she's going to marry a very powerful bender. Aang is the most powerful bender in the world, of his generation, in fact. And then Katara starts realizing Aang might be her future husband. Epic.
I mean, did you see the bending that he did to convince her of that? Like, holy crap, that was epic.
He used his breath to... I don't know, I'm blanking on the metric for lava, but not all this lava, he just melts it with his breath. He's so powerful. And he's so brave, too. He jumped into the volcano to stop it, and he did pretty easily, but that's very brave for him to just jump in like that.
Yeah, I mean, when you said he melted it, he actually did the opposite. He froze it. Gotcha. But anyway, I mean, his breath is used in this episode and the previous episode when Aang uses his breath to throw Zhao and flip him over into the wall. It shows that being an airbender isn't just about like making your arms go all over the place. It's about anything, all your part of your body. And this also reminds me how similar airbending and firebending are, where the motion of like breathing and all of that is also what you do with firebending. So you can also shoot fire out of like your mouth and everything like that. So it shows the link between the two.
Well, that's it. That is all for the fortune teller. That was all for the blue spirit. That is an end to episode 9. We're going to be at double digits the next time we record, Aaron. And we will not be together for that.
Yeah. It's an end of an era.
It is. The last episode of 2020. In person.
Yeah.
Yes, we will be back next week, of course, as always. But Aaron and I will have to do it on Zoom for about 2 months. Yeah. I'll be in Boston next week. Aaron will be in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
More like Nanticoke, Glenline, but close enough.
Okay. Well, I don't know Pennsylvania geography. Whatever. But that's all for Avatar State of Mind this week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Avatar State of Mind. We will be back next Saturday with another episode of this podcast. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Avatar State of Mind and Twitter at Avatar SOM for more content and to get sneak peeks at episodes before they release. If you have any recommendations for a future episode, please tweet us or comment on any of our Instagram posts. For Sam DeCoste, I am Aaron Miller. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Avatar State of Mind.
Bye.